38 years. That's how long Peter Sullivan spent behind bars for a crime he always said he didn't commit. He was just released this month, May 2025.
Yeah, 38 years. It's staggering when you actually say it out loud.
It really is nearly 4 decades.
Yeah.
A life just wrongly interrupted. It really makes you question how these kinds of, well, profound injustices can even happen.
Absolutely. And, while Mr. Sullivan's freedom is obviously a huge relief, long overdue,
Definitely.
this isn't just us retelling his story. We're trying to dive deep, really, into how wrongful convictions happen.
Right. Using his case as a sort of starting point.
Exactly. It's such a stark example of these broader systemic problems. We want to understand not just what happened in his case, but the factors behind it.
And connect it to other cases, see the patterns.
Yeah, connect it globally, see where the justice system failed, similarly elsewhere. For you listening, this is about trying to grasp the why and the how, not just the headlines.
Exactly. And we've gathered, well, quite a range of sources for this dive. We've got news reports on Sullivan's release, the details of why his case was re-examined.
Which are quite compelling.
Very. And we also looked into that Guðmundur and Geirfinnur case from Iceland.
Ah, yes. Truly shocking. That one still sends chills, doesn't it?
It really does. And then we've got overviews of other wrongful convictions, UK, US, elsewhere.
Yeah, quite a few examples.
So our mission really is to pull out the key insights from all this, to really get to grips with why these devastating errors keep happening in our justice systems.
Okay. So let's start with Peter Sullivan. Unpack that case first.
Good idea. So the original crime, that was back in 1986.
That's right. The murder of Diane Sindall in Bebington, Merseyside. A young woman, a florist, only 21.
And Sullivan was convicted the next year, 87.
Yes, by a unanimous jury verdict. And looking back, what's really concerning is what that conviction was based on.
Okay.
It was heavily reliant on, well, two things. His own confession.
Right.
And bite mark evidence found on Diane Sindall.
Bite mark evidence. Wow.
Yeah, he even got these awful nicknames like Wolfman or Beast of Birkenhead because of those marks.
It's almost hard to believe now, isn't it, that bite mark evidence carried so much weight?
It really highlights how much forensic science understanding has changed. Or, well, how much it needed to change.
Absolutely. So nearly 40 years on would turn the tide. It was DNA, wasn't it?
Yes, new DNA evidence. And crucially, these were from samples taken right back at the time of the crime in '86.
Okay.
They finally managed to get a profile from them. And that profile just did not match Peter Sullivan.
A clear mismatch.
Undeniable. And that was the catalyst, really, for the authorities finally taking another serious look at his conviction.
But it wasn't just the DNA, was it? The CCRC, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, they had other concerns.
Precisely. They didn't just focus on the DNA. They raised significant issues about how the police interviews were handled back then.
Like what?
Well, reportedly, he asked for a lawyer early on and was denied.
Seriously. That alone rings alarm bells, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the whole process.
Huge alarm bells. And it wasn't just that. The CCRC also pointed out that Sullivan said he wasn't given an appropriate adult during those interviews either.
Right, which is another crucial safeguard, especially if someone might be vulnerable.
Exactly. When you take away those basic protections, legal advice, support, it just creates this environment where, well, miscarriages of justice become much more likely.
Yeah, you can see how that happens. And this wasn't his first attempt to clear his name, was it?
No, not at all. It's important to remember this wasn't easy. He'd tried before. In 2008, he brought up the DNA issue.
Okay.
But back then, the view was scientifically that testing probably wouldn't yield a usable profile. So that failed.
And then he challenged the bite mark evidence later.
Yes, in 2019. But that appeal was rejected in 2021. So, his final release in May 2025.
After 38 years.
After 38 years. It just underscores how incredibly long and difficult that fight for justice can be.
And now it's the longest known miscarriage of justice in UK history.
Tragically, yes.
That amount of lost time, it's almost impossible to comprehend. And apparently his reaction has been quite remarkable.
It seems so. Reports suggest he's not bitter. His focus is on justice, not just for him, but also for Diane Sindall's family.
Which says a lot about him, really.
It truly does. And, well, understandably, this whole case has sparked renewed calls for reform in the UK system.
You'd hope so.
When something like this can happen and last for so long despite appeals, it forces a hard look at the safeguards, doesn't it?
Definitely. But as you said earlier, this isn't unique to the UK. Sullivan's case, however extreme in length, mirrors issues seen globally.
Exactly. Wrongful convictions are a deeply troubling global problem. When you connect Sullivan's case to the bigger picture, you start seeing these recurring patterns, similar failures.
So let's look at one of those other really disturbing cases, the Guðmundur and Geirfinnur case in Iceland.
Ah, yes, that one is quite something.
We're talking disappearances back in 1974, and eventually 6 people convicted of murder.
But here's the thing. There were no bodies, no witnesses, no forensic evidence linking them, nothing.
So what were the convictions based on?
Confessions. Solely on confessions.
All right.
But these weren't, straightforward admissions. The details that emerged later paint a picture of incredibly intense, prolonged interrogations.
How so?
The accused were held in isolation, almost totally cut off, very limited access to lawyers, and, disturbingly, reports of drugs being used.
Drugs? Like what?
Sedatives, antipsychotics, things like Mogadon, diazepam, chlorpromazine, plus sleep deprivation, and even, water torture in at least one instance.
Water torture? Good grief.
Yes, specifically involving Savar Cielski, who apparently had a real fear of water. He also always maintained the drugs massively affected his memory, his ability to recall anything accurately.
That's horrifying. The conditions sound unbelievable.
And the length of the solitary confinement, just staggering. Erla Bolladottir, 242 days. But 2 others, Tryggvi Runar Leifsson, over 600 days. 655 days in isolation.
That's unimaginable.
Reportedly the longest outside Guantanamo Bay at that time. And Savar Cielski's total time in custody was over 1,500 days. The psychological toll.
Must have been immense. Just crushing.
Absolutely. And the individuals themselves said they eventually signed the confessions just to get out of that solitary confinement, to escape the pressure.
Which leads to this idea of memory distress syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Developed by Gisli Gudjonsson because of this case.
Exactly. It's crucial for understanding this. It describes how, under that kind of extreme, prolonged duress and manipulation, an individual can start to fundamentally doubt their own memory. They become incredibly suggestible, reliant on what the interrogators are telling them.
So they can actually start to believe the false narrative.
They can internalize it, yes. Even come to believe they did commit acts they have no actual memory of. It's a direct result of those coercive techniques.
So these confessions, the entire basis of the case,
were likely the product of this intense psychological pressure. It's deeply disturbing that convictions could stand on such flawed foundations.
So what happened initially? Who was convicted of what?
Okay, so initially, Sivar, Christian, and Tryggvi for Guðmundur's murder. Albert for helping hide the body. Then Sivar, Christian, and Guðjón for Geirfinnur's murder. And Erla, she was convicted of perjury for her testimony against the others.
But eventually, these were overturned.
Yes, after decades of campaigning. Finally, in September 2018, the Supreme Court of Iceland acquitted 5 of the 6.
5. What about Erla?
Her perjury conviction wasn't initially reversed in that decision.
Ah, right. But there was an apology later. And compensation.
Thankfully, yes. After more legal battles, the Icelandic government issued a full official apology and gave compensation to everyone, including Erla. A vital step, really, to acknowledge the harm done.
A vital but very late step.
Very late. But what's still worrying is that despite this huge case highlighting the dangers,
solitary confinement is still used in Iceland.
It persists, yes. Amnesty International reports that even now, on average, over 80 people, including children, people with intellectual disabilities, are held in solitary for more than 22 hours a day.
Wow. So the lessons haven't fully sunk in.
It certainly raises serious questions. The BBC called the Guðmundur and Geirfinnur case one of the most shocking miscarriages of justice Europe has ever witnessed. That description really hits home the scale of it.
It really does. And sadly, as our sources show, these aren't just isolated incidents in the UK or Iceland. We see similar tragic stories playing out globally.
That's right. Look at Sean Hodgson in the UK, 27 years served, wrongly convicted in 82, exonerated by DNA finally in 2009.
27 years. And Chiang Kuching in Taiwan, executed in 1997.
Executed. And only cleared posthumously in 2011 after someone else confessed. Horrific.
Then there's Stunkel Bergwall in Sweden.
Yeah, the man who falsely confessed over 30 murders, all later recanted, convictions overturned in 2013. A very strange, complex case.
Alexander MacLeod Lindsay in Australia.
Convicted way back in 1964, exonerated in 1990 because new blood pattern analysis proved his innocence.
And in the U.S., the Central Park Five is probably one of the most well-known examples.
Absolutely. Coerced confessions from teenagers, no lawyers present during intense interrogations, exonerated years later by DNA and the real perpetrator's confession.
Lamar Johnson, also U.S.
Nearly 28 years. Convicted based on shaky eyewitness testimony and an informant, freed in 2023.
Sandra Hemi.
43 years. Just exonerated in 2024, the longest wrongful conviction of a woman in U.S. history. Again, a coerced confession given while she was heavily medicated in a psychiatric hospital.
Unbelievable. John Adrian Velasquez.
JJ, yeah. Freed this year, 2024, by new DNA after almost 24 years.
And finally, Curtis Flowers.
His case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. 6 trials for the same crime. The conviction was overturned due to clear prosecutorial misconduct and racial bias in jury selection. Charges finally dropped in 2020.
Looking across all these cases, Sullivan, Iceland, the U.S. examples, these recurring themes just jump out, don't they?
They really do. Time and time again, you see the problems with eyewitness testimony, how unreliable it can be.
Yeah, and informant testimony, too, often given in exchange for deals.
Exactly. And then the big one, coerced confessions. It comes up so often.
Linked to those intense interrogation tactics we talked about.
Yes, often combined with a lack of proper legal support for the person being questioned or exploiting vulnerabilities.
And flawed science, like the bite marks in Sullivan's case.
Absolutely. Forensic science that was maybe accepted at the time but is later debunked or shown to be far less reliable than assumed. It really shows we need constant scrutiny of forensic methods.
It's also striking how often DNA has been the key to finally proving innocence, sometimes decades later.
DNA technology has been revolutionary in uncovering these miscarriages. It provides that objective evidence that can cut through the earlier flawed evidence.
We also have to mention the role of organizations like the CCRC in the UK, the Innocence Project.
Definitely. Groups like that do vital work, digging into old cases, finding new evidence, fighting for appeals long after the system seems to have given up.
Though, as Sullivan's case showed, even with bodies like the CCRC, the process can be incredibly slow and face hurdles. They initially rejected his appeal attempts, didn't they?
That's a really important point. These organizations are essential safety nets, but the fact they have so much work to do and that it often takes so long, it points to those deeper systemic vulnerabilities we need to address. These aren't just occasional mistakes.
Right. It's not just about correcting errors after the fact, but preventing them in the first place.
Exactly.
So, reflecting on all this, Peter Sullivan, the Gumendor and Garifiner 6, all these other cases, it really shines a harsh light, doesn't it, on these weaknesses embedded in justice systems everywhere.
It really does. These aren't just isolated tragedies. They reveal patterns, systemic flaws that can lead to absolutely devastating consequences for individuals and their families.
Which leads to a really difficult question, I think, for you listening. Just take a moment to consider the sheer psychological weight, the burden on someone wrongly locked away for years, for decades.
How do you even begin to measure that loss? Those stolen years, the missed life moments? And what does real justice even look like after that kind of profound injustice?
And what's our collective responsibility, society's responsibility, not just in preventing these errors, which is crucial,
But also in supporting those who are eventually exonerated, helping them rebuild lives shattered by the system itself.
It's a really heavy but vital thing to think about. And if this has sparked your interest, if you want to explore more.
Would really encourage you to look into the work of innocence projects, maybe in your own area.
Yeah, and follow the ongoing debates about things like interrogation techniques, the reliability of evidence.
There are also some powerful documentaries, When They See Us, about the Central Park Five. It was incredibly moving. Out of Thin Air covers the Icelandic case in depth.
And numerous books, too, understanding these issues, engaging with these stories. It's all part of the long journey toward making our justice systems fairer and preventing these tragedies from happening again.